What types of environmental factors might be different in these zones? First, we'd like to talk about abiotic factors. Bio meaning life, and the A meaning absence of. So, the absence of living factors, non living factors. These are things that characterize or shape different environments, like sunlight or temperature. Think about the climate zones from the last concept question. Consider what abiotic or non living factors describe the different environments shown here. When we think about a tropical climate versus a polar climate, we can see that temperature, the amount of sunlight or rain, can vary across these zones. Plants photosynthesize and release oxygen. So the amount of oxygen is considered an abiotic factor. Even the floor of these environments are different. These abiotic factors can also describe the ocean environments shown here. You have cold versus hot and humid, but there are many more abiotic factors in an environment. Consider these ocean examples. For coral reef ecosystems, we think of them in tropical, maybe warm climates, possibly shallow, so near the coast, and a lot of sunlight. Also, maybe we picture them with lots of waves depending on the location. We can also see a change in abiotic factors with the depth of the ocean. On the bottom, you see a video of the deep sea. The deep sea doesn't get any sunlight, so it's very cold and it's an extremely high pressure environment. There are other abiotic factors such as minerals, oxygen availability, sedimentation, salinity, density, pressure, pH, and many more that vary at the surface versus the depth or in different ecosystems. Next, we'll look into biotic or living factors. Can you name any living things in these environments? We can't see any animals, but we can see that the plants are completely different in the different environments. Alive or dead trees or leaves are also included in biotic factors. Organisms are also considered biotic, and you can imagine that they are adapted best to certain environments that differ in abiotic factors. We can imagine that we'll see polar bears in the polar environment, but maybe not in the tropical mangrove forest in the top right. Let's look at other ocean environments again. In the top, you can see our coral reef ecosystem again. And in the video, you can see a lot of fish swimming around. You can understand there are corals, possibly algae, jellyfish, and shells. Shells are made from living organisms, so they are considered biotic. At the bottom, you can see the deep sea. Now, while you might not know what these organisms are, they are jellyfish, but we can also understand there's many different microorganisms and other creatures living there. So, any animals, plants, or microorganisms are all part of the biotic factors in an environment or an ecosystem. So, who lives in different ocean zones? Organisms are adapted best to certain areas in an environment. You can think of this like the polar bear example we mentioned earlier. These organisms rely on certain abiotic or biotic factors in their environment. Pelagic organisms are organisms that live in the water column. Plankton, such as those on the left, live suspended in this water column. They may have some locomotory power, but not enough to overcome major ocean currents or turbulence. These include copepods, algae, worms, and even jellyfish. On the right, you see examples of nekton. These are larger animals that are able to swim in the water column, and these include fish, sharks, and sea turtles. Benthic organisms, or benthos, is the community of animals and plants associated with the sea floor. On the top right, you can see epifaunal organisms. Epi meaning at the top, and faunals organisms or plants. So the epifaunal organisms live on top of the seafloor. This includes things like crabs, lobsters, sea urchins, and more. Infaunal organisms are organisms that live or burrow in the sediment or substrate. These include things like clams, tube worms, and even burrowing crabs. On the bottom right, you'll see examples of demersal. This is bottom living or feeding organisms. Demersal is a term that's mostly used for fish, like flatfish, such as halibut, skates, rays, and even some sharks. So remember the ocean depth zones? It turns out that these are really important for classifying the types of organisms that can live in each habitat. What is your favorite organisms? Do you see it on this page? And what oceanic zones do they live in? Organisms are part of something way larger than themselves. An organism is one individual of a living species. A population is a group of individuals of the same species within a geographic range. A community is a group of interacting populations that inhabit a specific environment. And finally, an ecosystem is the interaction of the entire community, so the biotic factors, with the non living or abiotic factors that make up an ecosystem. So, do you know the difference between an ecosystem and an environment? The environment is the surroundings of a given area or habitat. This is all of the abiotic factors, such as rocks, water, salinity, sunlight, temperature, where an ecosystem is an area consisting of all the abiotic and biotic factors together. Now, the biosphere consists of all the Earth's ecosystems. And we've talked about ecosystems such as the coral reefs and the deep sea. But can you name any others?